All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, we're heading to a pretty fascinating spot. You ready?
Always.
It's the Corralejo Dune System. It's in Fuerteventura, one of the Canary Islands.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of those dunes. Pretty amazing, right?
Yeah. You might think dunes? In a desert? What's the big deal? But hold on, there's a twist. These dunes are like constantly moving.
Really. Not just from the wind.
Well, that's part of it, but it's not the whole story. And that's what we're going to uncover today.
Sounds intriguing.
It is. We're going to be looking at some really cool research. There's this paper, a conceptual model for dune morphodynamics of the Corralejo Dune System, Fuerteventura, Spain. A mouthful, I know, but it's packed with insights.
We love a good scientific paper.
Absolutely. And we're not stopping there. We've got satellite images, aerial photos, even wave models, all to help us understand how these dunes work.
So we're really going deep on this one.
Deep dive, right. That's what we do. Okay. Before we get lost in the science, can you kind of set the scene for us? What's it like in Fuerteventura?
Okay, picture this. A pretty arid island, volcanic rock all over the place, and then these incredible beaches.
Okay, I'm liking this already.
That's Fuerteventura and the Corralejo Dune System. It stretches along a big chunk of the coastline. Oh, and of course, got to mention the wind. Trade winds, mostly from the north and northwest, blow pretty much constantly.
Ah, so those winds are what shapes the dunes.
They definitely play a huge role.
Mm.
But, and here's where things get interesting, the waves are also super important, way more than you might think.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Wind, waves, dunes. What's the big reveal here?
Well, for a long time, everyone thought it was pretty simple, like a conveyor belt almost. Wind picks up the sand in the north, pushes it into dunes, and eventually it all ends up down south.
Makes sense, right?
Right. Seems logical. But guess what? It's way more dynamic than that. The research actually found a feedback loop right there in the Corralejo Dune System.
A feedback loop. You mean the sand isn't just going on a one-way trip south?
Nope. It's not just piling up at the end. There's this whole process where the sand actually gets transported back north along the coast. And the evidence. We're talking over 60 years of satellite and aerial images. You can see this movement happening back and forth.
No way, that's crazy. So it's not just the wind pushing it around.
Exactly. Something else has to be bringing that sand back north.
So does the wind just change direction or something?
Uh-huh. No, not quite. It's actually all about the waves and currents around the island.
The waves, really?
Yep. And this is where things get even cooler. See, Fuerteventura has this little neighbor island called Lobos. And as small as it is, Lobos has a massive impact on how the waves behave around Fuerteventura.
So Lobos is like the puppet master of the waves. Interesting.
Pretty much. It all comes down to, how do they call it? Wave refraction. Yeah.
Okay, break that down for me.
Imagine the waves generated by those northerly winds. They're all heading toward the islands, right?
Mm.
But when they hit Lobos, they have to change direction. They bend around it. Kind of like light bending through a prism, you know?
Okay, got it. So Lobos is redirecting the waves, and then what?
Well, all that bending and redirecting creates these specific currents along the coast of Fuerteventura, especially going south down the east coast.
Ah, so it's the currents.
Exactly. And those currents, strong enough to pick up all that sand that got deposited in the south and carried it back north.
It's like a natural recycling system for the dunes.
You got it. Who knew something as seemingly simple as sand and wind could be this complex?
Right, it's mind-blowing. But hold on, how did the researchers even figure this all out?
Good question. They had to become like dune detectives.
Dune detectives, I love it. What did they use, magnifying glasses and footprints?
Uh-huh, close. One of their main tools was those aerial photographs we were talking about. Decades worth of them.
Right, the ones showing the sand moving.
Exactly. By comparing photos from different years, they could actually track how the dunes were moving. It's like watching them shift and change over time.
Wow, that's so cool. So like a time lapse of the dunes, did they spot anything else interesting in those photos?
They did. This is where we see how humans are impacting the system. Up in the north, where Corralejo town is, well, all that development has actually messed with the sand supply to the dunes.
Oh no, so our buildings and stuff are messing with the natural flow of the sand.
Yeah, it's like we're interrupting the conveyor belt, so to speak.
Yikes. That can't be good.
Not really. But to confirm their suspicions, the researchers didn't just rely on the photos, they also used wave modeling.
What's that?
It's like, think of it as creating a virtual wave tank on a computer. You can simulate how waves would behave in different locations with different factors at play.
So they basically recreated the whole coastline virtually.
Basically. And you know what? Their wave models totally backed up what they were seeing in the aerial photos. Confirmed that Lobos is the key player here, shaping the waves and creating those sand-carrying currents.
This is incredible. We've got photos showing us the dunes in action, wave models confirming the science, and this amazing discovery of a sand recycling system. It's like everything just fits together perfectly.
It does, doesn't it? Nature is full of these amazing, intricate systems.
Totally. But I gotta ask, why does all this even matter? I mean, it's cool and all, but what are the implications?
Great question. Because it's not just a scientific curiosity. This knowledge can actually help us manage and protect these coastal areas.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into that. Let's get into the why this matters. All right, so let's get into why this sand recycling system matters. Why should we care about these dunes doing their thing?
Well, think about it. This knowledge isn't just some abstract science experiment. It has some real-world implications. Like, remember how the aerial photos showed that development up north was messing with the sand supply?
Yeah, like the town was basically cutting off the sand.
Exactly. And if that sand isn't getting replenished, the whole dune system could be in trouble.
Makes sense. No sand, no dunes.
Pretty much. Yeah. But it goes beyond just the dunes themselves. This knowledge can help us make better decisions, smarter urban planning.
So, like, if we know that building stuff can disrupt the natural flow of sand, we can build in a way that minimizes the impact.
Exactly. It's about finding ways for humans and nature to coexist. Because that interrupted sand flow, it's not just some abstract concept, it can lead to some serious issues.
Like what?
Well, think about coastal erosion.
Ah, right. If the sand isn't being replaced naturally, the coastline becomes more vulnerable.
Exactly. And that erosion, it
Mhm.
doesn't just affect the natural environment. It can threaten infrastructure, property, all sorts of things.
So understanding this feedback loop, this whole sand recycling thing, can help us make smarter choices about how we interact with these coastal areas.
100%. It's not just about protecting the dunes, it's about protecting everything connected to them.
It's all connected, right? We keep seeing that over and over. Are there other ways we can use this knowledge?
Absolutely. Conservation efforts, for example. If we know how the sand moves, where it gets deposited, we can make more informed decisions about things like planting vegetation.
Oh, like to help stabilize the dunes?
Exactly. Or even creating artificial dunes if needed.
It's like having a blueprint for how to best protect this whole ecosystem.
It is. And beyond the practical stuff, like managing and conserving the dunes, the Corralejo system is also like a really valuable case study for scientists.
Oh, how so?
Well, it shows how important it is to consider both land and sea when studying coastal environments.
Right, like for a long time, those were totally separate fields of study, weren't they?
They were. But the Corralejo system shows us they're totally intertwined. You can't understand one without the other. It's a much more, how should I say, holistic way of looking at these environments.
It's pretty amazing, right? This seemingly simple system of sand and wind turns out to be way more complex than anyone imagined. And I think it just highlights something really important. We tend to make assumptions about nature, think we know how things work.
Yeah, we get stuck in those old ways of thinking.
Exactly. But then we discover something like this sand recycling system, and it totally blows our minds. And it makes me wonder what other hidden connections are out there. What else are we missing?
It's a great question. And honestly, I think that's what makes science so exciting. There's always more to discover, always something new to learn.
Absolutely. This whole deep dive into the Corralejo Dune System has been mind-blowing. I love how something that seems so basic on the surface can actually be so intricate and interconnected.
It's a good reminder that nature is full of surprises and there's always more beneath the surface.
So much to explore. And you've given us so much to think about, especially when it comes to how we can apply this knowledge to protect and manage these amazing coastal areas.
I'm glad to hear that. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, isn't it? Using our understanding of nature to make better decisions for the future.
Absolutely. Well, before we wrap things up, let's recap what we've learned about this incredible dune system. We know now that it's not just some static landscape, it's dynamic, constantly changing. And that sand, it's not just blowing around randomly, it's part of this whole recycling system driven by the wind, waves, and the unique geology of those islands.
And we can't forget about the human element, how our actions, our development, can impact this delicate balance. It's a powerful reminder that we need to be mindful of how we interact with these coastal ecosystems.
Yeah, definitely a lot to think about there. But the biggest takeaway for me is that what we see on the surface is often just the tip of the iceberg.
I agree. It's like a whole hidden world full of connections and feedback loops that we're only just beginning to understand.
It makes you wonder what else is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it? The possibilities are endless. And as we wrap up our deep dive into the Corralejo Dune System, I want to leave everyone with a final thought. If this kind of sand recycling can exist on what seems like a simple desert island, what other hidden connections and feedback loops might we be missing in other environments?
It's a question worth pondering. It reminds us to approach nature with a sense of curiosity, always looking for those unexpected relationships. You never know what you might find.
Well said. The world is full of wonders, and it's up to us to keep exploring and uncovering those hidden connections. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
That's a really interesting thought about those hidden connections. Makes you wonder, are there any other examples of these kind of feedback loops? Maybe in totally different environments.
Oh, definitely. Tons. Think about rainforests, for example.
Okay.
You'd think they just rely on rainfall, right? All that lush greenery.
Yeah, that's what I always thought.
But actually, a big chunk of the moisture in rainforests, it comes from the trees themselves.
Wait, what? The trees make their own rain.
Sort of. It's called transpiration. So the trees, they pull up water from the soil, right?
Right.
And then they release some of that moisture into the air through tiny little pores on their leaves.
So it's like they're sweating.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
And all that water vapor, it goes up, forms clouds, and then eventually falls back down as rain.
So it's like the rainforest is watering itself. That's wild.
It is. It's this amazing self-sustaining system. And it's super important for keeping the rainforest healthy and supporting all that incredible biodiversity.
I never knew that. So cool. What about the ocean? Any feedback loops going on under the sea?
Oh, for sure. One of the coolest examples is the relationship between phytoplankton and climate change.
Phytoplankton, those are like tiny plants, right?
Exactly. Microscopic plants that float around in the ocean. And just like plants on land, they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere during photosynthesis.
So they're like little carbon-sucking machines.
Exactly. But here's the thing. When phytoplankton die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean, taking all that carbon with them.
So it's like carbon storage.
Yep. It's called the biological pump, and it's super important for regulating our climate.
Wow. Little plants having a huge impact. It's amazing how everything's connected.
Right. And it makes you realize that even the smallest parts of an ecosystem can play a huge role. It's like a delicate balance, you know?
Totally. This is making me think about the world in a whole new way. Like, I want to go out and find these connections everywhere.
And you should, because they really are everywhere. Did you know that wolves can actually change the course of rivers?
Wolves changing rivers. How is that even possible?
Well, this happened in Yellowstone National Park. Back in the 90s, they reintroduced wolves into the park.
Right. I heard about that.
Well, before the wolves came back, there were tons of elk, and they were eating all the plants along the riverbanks.
Oh, no. So the elk were causing problems.
Yeah, all that overgrazing was causing erosion. The rivers were becoming less stable. But when the wolves came back, everything changed.
Because they started eating the elk.
Exactly. The elk population went down, and they started avoiding areas where they were vulnerable to wolf attacks. So the plants along the rivers, they had a chance to grow back.
And that helped stabilize the river.
You got it. It's called a trophic cascade.
Trophic cascade sounds intense.
Basically, how changes at the top of the food chain can ripple down and affect the whole ecosystem. Pretty cool, huh?
That's incredible. It's like this chain reaction.
Exactly. And it shows how everything is interconnected. You can't just change one thing without impacting everything else.
So from sand dunes to rainforests to wolves and rivers, it's all connected.
It really is. And that's the message I hope everyone takes away from this deep dive.
Yeah. Look for those connections, ask questions, and be amazed by the incredible complexity of our planet.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
And thanks to all of you listening. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.